The air in the Zalosian Grand Conclave was a physical weight, a pressure born of ancient stone and unspoken dread. Light, thin and silver, spilled from crystalline structures embedded in the impossibly high, vaulted ceiling, casting the assembly of galactic powers into a chiaroscuro of sharp-edged shadows and solemn, illuminated faces. At the chamber's heart, a colossal sphere of captured light pulsed with a soft, malevolent rhythm, displaying the source of their collective anxiety. It was a message, translated and endlessly analyzed, yet its core remained stubbornly opaque, a shard of glass in the throat of galactic diplomacy. The words, rendered in the formal, flowing script of the conclave's lingua franca, were stark, an affront to the layered protocols that had governed interstellar relations for millennia. Last message from Earth: if you continue to fight this war, you will have to give a dangerous response. A primitive sentiment from a primitive species, and yet it had silenced the most powerful beings in this spiral arm of the galaxy. High Counselor Valerius of Xylos felt the silence more acutely than any sound. His own people, the Xylosians, were masters of nuance, a species whose language contained hundreds of words for different qualities of silence. This one was brittle, stretched taut over a chasm of fear and arrogance. He rested his long, slender fingers on the cool, obsidian surface of the council dais, his gaze fixed on the glowing sphere. The message was an insult, a clear violation of the containment protocol they had imposed upon the Sol system. For generations, the Conclave had watched humanity. They had observed their violent, chaotic expansion, their self-destructive tendencies, their bafflingly rapid technological advancement that seemed to outpace their own wisdom. They were a paradox, a species that composed breathtaking symphonies with one hand while crafting weapons of planetary annihilation with the other. The war the message spoke of was not a war in the grand, sweeping sense of galactic conquest, but a carefully orchestrated series of proxy conflicts and engineered setbacks on the fringes of human influence. A gentle, persistent caging of a creature they deemed too unpredictable to be let loose upon a stable, ordered cosmos. "It is the incoherent rambling of a cornered animal," came a deep, resonant voice that seemed to shake the very stone of the chamber. Warlord Atrak of the Cathar Legion stood, his massive frame eclipsing the light behind him, his mandibles clicking with predatory impatience. The Cathar were a species forged in the crucible of a high-gravity world, their philosophy a simple, brutal equation of strength and dominance. They saw the universe as a hierarchy of power, and humanity was, by their calculus, a lower life form. They have reached the limit of their designated territory. They feel our pressure and they lash out with empty threats. Their dangerous response will be nothing more than a final, futile charge. I say we grant them the battle they seem to desire. Let our fleets purge their system and cleanse this quadrant of their chaotic influence. It would be a mercy. Atrak's sentiment was met with murmurs of approval from the more hawkish members of the conclave, those who saw humanity not as a puzzle to be solved, but as a weed to be uprooted before it could choke the manicured gardens of their established order. Valerius felt a familiar weariness settle upon him. The Cathar solution was always the same: overwhelming force. It was clean, simple, and utterly devoid of foresight. "And what if you are wrong, warlord?" Valerius's voice was calm, a counterpoint to Atrak's belligerence, but it carried the authority of his station and the accumulated wisdom of his long life. "We have consistently underestimated this species. Our initial projections claimed they would not achieve spaceflight for another 1,000 of their years. They did it in less than 200. Our finest intelligence analysts predicted their global communication network would lead to societal collapse through information overload. It instead triggered an unprecedented explosion of collaborative innovation. They are a species that thrives on pressure, that forges its greatest strengths in the fires of adversity. To dismiss this message as a mere ramble is to ignore the lessons of our own observations." From another section of the chamber, a being of pure, shimmering light coalesced into a humanoid form. It was Matriarch Lyra of the Lumina, a species of non-corporeal energy beings who perceived reality as a grand, interconnected equation. Her voice was not a sound, but a series of harmonic modulations that resonated directly in the minds of all present. "The High Counselor speaks with logic. There is an anomaly in the message. Its structure is inefficient. The grammar is crude, declarative. It lacks the subtlety of a formal diplomatic warning, yet it also lacks the emotional marker of a genuine threat display. It is a statement of fact, delivered with a cold, almost mathematical certainty. Our probability models are inconclusive. The range of potential meanings is too wide. The variable humanity is itself a source of chaos in our projections." The Lumina did not feel fear as the organic species did, but Lyra's form wavered slightly, a visual representation of her deep, logical uncertainty. They had dedicated vast resources to understanding the human psyche, building complex simulations to predict their behavior. All of them had failed, crashing against the wall of human contradiction. Their capacity for both selfless love and unspeakable cruelty, their soaring artistic aspirations and their base, territorial instincts. "They are broken," sneered a Zychar delegate, a serpentine creature whose race communicated through shifting color patterns on their scales as much as through speech. "A psychologically fractured species. They speak of a dangerous response because they themselves do not know what they will do. They are children playing with fire and they are about to burn themselves. The containment protocol is no longer sufficient. It is time for pacification." Valerius looked from face to face, seeing the reflection of his own concerns mirrored in some, but outright dismissal in others. The conclave was a fragile thing, an alliance of disparate powers bound by a shared desire for stability, but each with its own agenda. The Cathar desired conquest, the Zychar sought control, the Lumina craved knowledge, and humanity, the silent, distant object of their debate, threatened the core assumptions of them all. He let the silence stretch once more, letting the weight of their decision press down upon the assembly. He remembered the first images they had received from Earth, primitive radio waves carrying songs of heartbreak and joy, grainy video signals showing them walking on their own moon, a feat of breathtaking audacity for a species that had barely learned to leave its own atmosphere. He had felt a sense of wonder then, a feeling that had long since been eroded by the endless reports of their wars, their politics, their seemingly endless capacity for self-inflicted pain. But the message, it felt different. It was not a plea for mercy, nor was it a boastful challenge. As Lyra had noted, it was a statement. If you continue this, then that will happen. A simple, causal declaration. Valerius's mind turned to the vast, silent fleets of the conclave, ships of immense power, each capable of sterilizing a continent, all positioned just beyond the edge of the Sol system's Uit cloud, a ring of celestial predators waiting for the order to descend upon their unsuspecting prey. The humans knew they were there, of course. Their primitive sensor technology would have detected the gravitational anomalies, the faint energy signatures. They knew they were surrounded, outmatched, and facing a coalition of civilizations that had controlled the galaxy since before their species had learned to harness fire. And yet, their response was not to beg or to surrender. It was to issue a warning. "We have pushed them," Valerius said, his voice barely a whisper, yet it carried across the cavernous chamber. "We have prodded and tested and contained them, believing we were acting as responsible stewards of the galaxy. We justified our actions by citing their volatility, their potential for destruction. But have we ever considered that our pressure might be forcing them to become something we fear even more? A species that is calm, logical, and in possession of a response they deem dangerous not out of arrogance but out of a sober assessment of its consequences." He let his gaze drift back to the pulsing holographic words. The message was not from a government or a military leader. It was signed simply, Earth, the collective will of an entire world. A world they had treated as a problem to be managed, but which might, in fact, be a force beyond their comprehension. The debate raged on, the voices of warlords and diplomats echoing in the ancient hall. But for Valerius, the chamber had grown cold. He felt a profound sense of foreboding, a chilling certainty that they were standing on the precipice of a monumental error, and that the strange, contradictory species from that distant blue world was about to teach the galaxy a lesson in the true meaning of power. The conclave, after days of fractious and circular debate, reached a compromise that satisfied no one but prevented immediate open conflict. It was decided that direct communication was necessary, a final attempt to gauge the true intent behind Earth's unnerving message before the Cathar Legion was unleashed. A set of coordinates were broadcast into the Sol system, a location deep in interstellar space, equidistant from Earth and the conclave's primary staging ground. It was a neutral, empty point in the void, chosen for its profound lack of strategic V. They would meet there, vessel to vessel, and demand clarification. Warlord Atrak saw it as a pointless delay, a final diplomatic nicety before the inevitable, glorious purge. Matriarch Lyra viewed it as an opportunity to gather critical data, to observe a human up close, even if only through a viewscreen. Valerius held on to it as a last, slender thread of hope that a catastrophic miscalculation could be avoided. The conclave dispatched a vessel befitting their authority, It was a diplomatic cruiser, though that term was a significant understatement. The ship, named Vigilance, was a marvel of Zalosian engineering, a crescent of polished, iridescent metal miles long, bristling with shielded sensor arrays and discreetly hidden weapon emplacements. It was a symbol of their power, designed to awe and intimidate. A full complement of Cathar shock troops were stationed in its hangar bays, a silent promise of the consequences of failure. Warlord Atrak, Matriarch Lyra, and Valerius himself were all aboard, observing the proceedings from the ship's vast command bridge, a cavern of holographic displays and silent, efficient crew members. They arrived at the designated coordinates and waited, the Vigilance hanging in the blackness like a shard of fallen moonlight. They did not have to wait long. Exactly at the appointed time, a distortion appeared in the fabric of space. It was not the brutal, tearing rupture of a Cathar hyperdrive entry, nor the elegant, silent folding of space utilized by Zalosian vessels. It was something else entirely. A small, perfect sphere of absolute blackness simply appeared. It absorbed all light, all sensor readings, a hole in reality itself. Then just as silently the sphere dissolved, and in its place was a ship. The assembled aliens on the bridge of the Vigilance stared in stunned silence. They had expected a warship, perhaps a flotilla of smaller, aggressive vessels. Instead, they were faced with a craft so small and unassuming it seemed absurd. It was a simple, stark white vessel, shaped like a teardrop, with no visible engines, no weapon ports, no markings of any kind save for a single, small, circular blue and green emblem on its hull. It was dwarfed by the Vigilance, a minnow next to a leviathan. Warlord Atrak let out a short, sharp bark of what might have been laughter. "This is their champion. They send this escape pod. They mock us." "Negative," Lyra's harmonic voice cut through the bridge. "The energy readings from their arrival are impossible. They did not travel through hyperspace. They did not manipulate spacetime in any way we understand. It is as if they simply excised their vessel from one set of coordinates and inserted it into another. Instantaneously. The power required for such a feat is astronomical." Her shimmering form flickered with intense concentration. The Lumina were beings of energy. They understood the physics of the universe on a fundamental level, and what they had just witnessed defied their most advanced theories. A communication channel opened. There was no preamble, no formal greeting. A calm, steady male voice, speaking flawless, unaccented conclave standard, filled the bridge. "This is Ambassador Kalen of Earth. We have come as requested. We are ready to communicate." On the main holographic display, the image of a single human appeared. He was seated in a simple, unadorned room, the walls a soft, neutral gray. He wore a plain, dark blue uniform, also devoid of rank or insignia. His features were unremarkable, his expression placid, almost serene. There was no anger in his eyes, no fear, no arrogance. There was only a profound and unnerving stillness. Valerius studied the man, searching for any sign of the chaotic, emotional species he had studied for so long. He found none. This human was a perfect enigma. "I am High Counselor Valerius," he began, his voice steady despite the growing unease in his mind. "With me are Warlord Atrak and Matriarch Lyra. You have issued a statement to the Galactic Conclave, a statement we find ambiguous and potentially hostile. You will explain the meaning of your dangerous response." The human, Kalen, inclined his head slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement. "There is no ambiguity, High Counselor. The message is a precise and literal statement. If the series of aggressive actions against our sovereign space and developing colonies continues, we will be forced to enact a response that we, and you, would find dangerous." Atrak pushed forward, his massive form filling the holoprojector's pickup. "Your threats are meaningless, human. Your tiny ship is an insult. Our fleets surround your system. We can extinguish your star. We can crack your world open like an egg. What possible response could you muster that would be a danger to us?" The ambassador's calm gaze did not waver. He looked at the enraged Cathar warlord with an expression that Valerius could only interpret as a kind of detached pity. "Warlord, you mean? So understand the nature of the danger. Your thinking is constrained by a paradigm of force and destruction. You speak of extinguishing stars and breaking worlds. These are actions of immense violence, but they are limited. They are finite. The danger we speak of is of a different order entirely." "Elucidate," Lyra's voice chimed in, her curiosity overriding all other protocols. "Your method of travel suggests a mastery of physics that contradicts our understanding of your technological level. The nature of this response is the primary variable we seek to resolve." Ambassador Kalen's eyes shifted to where he knew the Lumina matriarch was observing. "Very well. For generations, our species was plagued by conflict. We nearly destroyed ourselves on multiple occasions. These experiences, our great wars, as we call them, taught us a fundamental lesson, that the cycle of escalating violence is a logical trap. It is a game in which the only winning move is not to play. Our entire societal and technological development for the past several centuries has been dedicated to solving this one problem: how to defend oneself without perpetuating the cycle of aggression. He paused, letting his words settle in the silent bridge of the vigilance. The concept was alien to them. For the Cathar, war was a tool of statecraft. For the Zalosians, it was a regrettable necessity of galactic politics. For the Lumina, it was a complex but predictable interaction of forces. The idea of simply refusing to participate was illogical. We did not seek to build a better weapon, Kalen continued, his voice maintaining its steady, measured cadence. A better weapon only invites the creation of a better shield, which in turn invites the creation of a weapon that can bypass it. It is an endless, resource-draining spiral that leads only to mutual destruction. Instead, we sought a different solution. We sought a way to remove ourselves and our aggressor from the equation of conflict itself. Valerius leaned forward, his mind racing to grasp the implications. "What are you saying?" The human ambassador looked directly at him, and for the first time, Valerius saw a flicker of something in the man's eyes. It wasn't emotion, not in the way he understood it. It was the deep, profound gravity of a truth he was about to deliver. The dangerous response is not a weapon. It is a state of being. We call it the resonance field. If you continue your aggression, if your fleets cross a final, designated perimeter around our system, we will activate it. It is a field, generated by a network of probes placed at the Lagrange points of our star, that alters the fundamental nature of causality within a localized sphere of spacetime. Atrak scoffed. "Metaphysical nonsense, speak plainly, human." "I am speaking plainly, warlord," Kalen replied, his patience seemingly infinite. "The resonance field does not destroy, it does not kill, it simply isolates. Any vessel, any entity that performs an act of aggression within the field becomes trapped in a non-paradoxical, self-contained temporal loop. Your fleets would fire their first volley, and as they did, time for them would reset. They would find themselves at the exact moment before they fired, compelled by the same orders and the same intent, and they would fire again. And again. And again. Forever. They would be trapped in an eternal, repeating moment of their own hostility, removed from the flow of universal time, a ghost in spacetime, harmless to us and to everyone else for the rest of eternity." A profound, chilling silence descended upon the bridge of the vigilance. The crew stood frozen at their stations. Atrak's mandibles were slightly agape, his bluster completely gone, replaced by a look of sheer, uncomprehending horror. He was a warrior. He understood death. He understood honorable combat and glorious destruction. The idea of his legions, his great and mighty fleets, not being destroyed, but being trapped forever in a single, meaningless moment of aggression, their minds and souls locked in an endless prison of their own making, it was an obscenity. It was a fate worse than any death he could conceive. Lyra's form was now glowing with a brilliant, intense light. Causality manipulation on such a scale, it would require a complete understanding of quantum entanglement across multiple dimensions. It would require energy levels that could destabilize a star. It is the work of gods. "It is the work of a species that has grown tired of war," Kalen corrected gently. "We determined that the sanctity of consciousness, even that of an enemy, is paramount. We could not ethically bring ourselves to extinguish the lives of your soldiers, but we also could not allow you to extinguish ours. This was the only solution that satisfied both conditions. It is not an act of war, it is an act of quarantine, a final, absolute, and permanent de-escalation. We are giving you the choice to simply turn a roux. ND and leave us in peace. If you refuse that choice, we will not fight you, we will not destroy you, we will simply remove you from the conversation." Valerius sank back into his chair, the full weight of the revelation crashing down upon him. He finally understood. The crude, simple message, the calm, unassuming ambassador, the tiny, featureless ship. It was all of a piece. It wasn't arrogance, it was confidence. A confidence born not of superior firepower, but of a superior philosophy. They had been trying to cage a tiger, while the humans had been quietly building a philosophical fortress from which they could watch the rest of the galaxy tear itself apart. The humans hadn't been afraid of the Conclave's power. They had been afraid of what they would be forced to do with their own. The dangerous response was dangerous not just to the Conclave, but to humanity's own ethical soul. It was a tool of last resort, a terrible and profound act of self-isolation they would only deploy to preserve their fundamental principles. They had solved the problem of war by simply choosing to step outside of it, and they had bent the laws of physics themselves to make that choice a reality. The galaxy had been playing checkers, while humanity, in its quiet, isolated corner of the cosmos, had been learning to play a game the Conclave didn't even know existed. The silence on the bridge of the Vigilance stretched into a new quality, one for which the Zalosian language had no word. It was the silence of a paradigm shattering. Warlord Atrak stood as if turned to stone, the implications of the human's revelation washing over his martial mind. His entire existence was predicated on the concepts of glorious battle, honorable death, and the spoils of conquest. The human proposal offered none of these. It offered only a sterile, eternal, and deeply humiliating prison of the mind. It was a form of defeat so absolute and so alien that his warrior's spirit could not even process it as a possibility. It was not a weapon. It was an ontological trap, a philosophical checkmate from which there was no escape. Matriarch Lyra's luminous form pulsed with a slow, rhythmic cadence, a sign of deep computational processing. "The energy signature of your arrival," she modulated, her voice filled with a new tone of profound respect. It was not a drive system. It was a micro-application of the same principle. You did not travel. You defined your destination as your current location. An elegant, if terrifyingly complex, solution. "Efficiency is a core tenet of our current philosophy," Ambassador Kalen replied calmly. "Conflict is the ultimate inefficiency. It wastes lives, resources, and time. We have redirected the energies our species once dedicated to mutual destruction toward the understanding and manipulation of fundamental constants. We would prefer to share this understanding. We would prefer to engage in an exchange of knowledge and culture, but we will not do so under duress." Valerius finally found his voice. It was hoarse, strained. "You have had this capability for how long?" He needed to know. He needed to understand the scale of their miscalculation. "The theoretical principles have been understood for over a century of our time," Kalen said. "The practical application has been operational for the last 50 years. We have watched your fleets assemble. We have observed your proxy actions. We have waited hoping that you would cease, that you would choose to communicate rather than coerce. Your decision to do so now is encouraging." 50 years, for half a century, humanity had held this power in reserve. They had possessed the ability to neutralize the entire Conclave fleet, to end the threat to their existence with the flip of a switch, and yet they had done nothing. They had patiently endured the containment, the political pressure, the military posturing. They had waited for the Conclave to make the first move toward peace. It was a level of restraint that was, to Valerius, both terrifying and deeply humbling. His own people, for all their wisdom and diplomacy, would have leveraged such a power immediately. The Cathar would have used it to conquer the galaxy. The humans, they had kept it hidden, a shield of last resort, hoping never to use it. "Why?" Valerius asked, the question genuine, born of a need to understand the psyche of this incredible species. "Why wait? Why not reveal your strength and demand a place on this council?" "Because that is not the way," Kalen answered simply. "A seat demanded at the threat of force is not a seat of honor. An alliance born of fear is not a true partnership. We did not wish to join your galactic community as a new, dominant power. We wished to be invited as equals when we had proven ourselves worthy. The tragedy is that we had to prove our worthiness by demonstrating our capacity for a response you would deem dangerous." There was a profound sadness in his voice now, the first true emotion Valerius had detected. It was the sadness of a philosopher forced to demonstrate a weapon. Warlord Atrak finally moved. He turned away from the holographic display, his entire posture one of defeat. He spoke not to the ambassador, but to Valerius. "There is no honor in this. We cannot fight an enemy that will not die. We cannot conquer a people who will not fight. This is not war. It is an execution of the soul." He strode from the command bridge without another word, the sound of his heavy footsteps echoing in the renewed silence. He had been prepared to die for his empire. He had no framework for how to live in a universe where his strength was irrelevant. Valerius looked at Lyra, whose light had softened to a gentle, contemplative glow. "The variable humanity is no longer a source of chaos," she stated. "It is a new constant. Their ethical framework is as rigid and as powerful as the physical laws they have learned to manipulate. Our projections were wrong because they failed to account for a species that could fundamentally change the rules of the game itself." The High Counselor turned his full attention back to the human ambassador. The political landscape of the galaxy had been redrawn in the space of a single conversation. The conclave was not the supreme power it had believed itself to be. It was a coalition of squabbling children, brandishing sharp sticks in the presence of a quiet, patient adult who had long since put away childish things. The containment protocol was a farce. The entire premise of their relationship with humanity had been built on a foundation of profound ignorance. Ambassador Kalen, Valeria said, his voice now imbued with a new gravity and a sense of historic weight. It appears the Galactic Conclave owes your people an apology and an invitation. We have much to discuss, as equals. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of the ambassador's lips. We are glad to hear that, High Counselor. We believe our two cultures have much to learn from one another. Our isolation, though necessary, has been a heavy burden. We have long looked at the stars and hoped to find true companionship there. It was in this moment of nascent understanding, as the old fears began to recede and the first, tentative seeds of a new alliance were sown, that Ambassador Kalen's expression shifted. The calm, professional mask dissolved, replaced by a look of deep, profound seriousness. The subtle sadness Valerius had noted before returned, but magnified, sharpened into a point of genuine concern. High Counselor, Kalen said, his tone shifting from that of a diplomat to that of a solemn messenger. There is another reason for our reluctance to engage in interstellar conflict. There is a reason we dedicated so much of our energy to developing a purely defensive, non-lethal deterrent. It was not merely a reaction to our own past, nor was it solely in anticipation of a confrontation with the Conclave. Valerius felt a cold dread begin to creep back into his veins, a feeling that the true revelation of the day had not yet arrived. What are you saying, Ambassador? Our isolation has afforded us a unique perspective, Kalen explained. With no external conflicts to distract us, our science has been focused inward but also outward in ways you might not imagine. Our deep space observatories are not limited to the electromagnetic spectrum. We have learned to detect the subtle resonances of spacetime itself, the echoes of vast energies and ancient events. For decades, we have been monitoring a signal. It is not of our galaxy. Its point of origin lies in the intergalactic void, in the great, dark emptiness between galactic clusters. On the main view screen, the image of the ambassador was replaced by a complex three-dimensional star chart. It showed their galaxy, a familiar spiral of stars, and far beyond it, a single point of red light, blinking with a slow, inexorable rhythm. This signal is not a communication, Kalen continued, his voice low and somber. It is not directed at us or at you. It is directed at this entire region of space. The signal is old. We estimate it has been traveling for millions of years. Its power is unlike anything we have ever encountered. And its message, when translated through the universal language of mathematics and physics, is terrifyingly simple. Lyra's form flared. A message, what does it say? Ambassador Kalen looked at the assembled beings on the bridge of the Vigilance, his eyes holding the weight of a terrible knowledge, a burden his species had carried alone for far too long. It's a countdown, he said, his voice barely a whisper against the hum of the ship. A slow, methodical, galactic-scale countdown, and it is nearing its end. The resonance field was not just a defense against you, High Counselor. It was our ultimate contingency, a way to isolate our world, to take our small corner of reality off the board entirely in the desperate hope of surviving what is coming. The camera in the ambassador's room pulled back, revealing more of the space behind him. It was not a simple room. It was the command center of the human vessel, and on the walls were dozens of other screens, all showing the same thing: the star chart, the red blinking light, and the countdown timer. The numbers were incomprehensibly large, but the final digits were ticking down with a horrifying, relentless certainty. Valerius stared at the screen, the political squabbles, the military posturing, the entire history of the Galactic Conclave seeming to shrink into utter insignificance. They had spent centuries arguing over territory and resources, blind and deaf to the true nature of the universe they inhabited. They had feared the chaotic, unpredictable nature of humanity, never once suspecting that humanity's greatest fear lay far beyond them, out in the silent, patient darkness. The humans hadn't been preparing for a war with the Conclave. They had been preparing for the end of everything, and in their profound, terrifying wisdom, they had decided that the only thing worth saving was the principle of not fighting. A new silence fell upon the bridge of the Vigilance. It was not the silence of tension or of shock. It was the silence of a shared, cosmic dread. They were no longer adversaries, no longer a council of powerful races and a primitive upstart. They were simply inhabitants of a galaxy that had just been put on notice. Valerius looked at the calm, somber face of the human ambassador and felt a strange, new emotion, not fear of humanity, but a desperate, clinging hope in them. They were the ones who had seen the storm coming. They were the ones who had prepared. And now, at the 11th hour, they had opened their doors, not to surrender or to threaten, but to warn. The war was over. A much larger and far more terrible struggle was about to begin.